So anxiety has become one of the challenging aspects in life today, and we've realized that many people struggle with feelings of depression and fear, anxiety, and this is often done in isolation. So we decided to ask Dr. Prins, who is a senior counseling psychologist with a long history in academics, corporate wellness, and private practice, to come and talk to us a little bit today about anxiety and the effects of anxiety, the symptoms of anxiety, and how to manage that, and also what treatment options is available to people. Welcome, Dr. Prins. Thank you so much for being here. What is this thing called anxiety?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I think it's important for us to understand that we are survival mechanism. Any living being is a survival mechanism. So anything that influences your survival, threatens your survival, will lead to a stress or an anxiety response. So it's interesting to see how we were created, because we have a radar system very much like an aeroplane has. And our radar system is actually our sensory modalities. So our eyes are forever screening the environment to see if there's anything that might hurt us, or we might hear something which alerts us, perhaps a child screaming outside or brakes being applied. Then also we smell. We might smell a gas which might be detrimental to us, or we might put something into our mouth which is offish and we would normally just spit it out. And then also our whole skin is also a sensory modality. So this radar of us scans our environment the whole time for anything that might impede our survival. And that will then lead to a particular response in our body. Mm-hmm. So what happens is that this information is fed into our brain, into a little organ in the middle of the brain, which is the receptor of all of these bits of information that comes to us. And it does two things simultaneously with this information. Firstly, it rolls it over our amygdala, which is our emotional memory system. And it also sends this information to the cortex, where this type of information is then interpreted. So what happens now is, if the amygdala had previously been exposed to something like this, say for example a snake, if it knows that the snake might cause us harm, it will throw us into a particular response. But then within milliseconds, the cortex will then either confirm or disconfirm what the amygdala had seen. And that will then set up a whole process. We will be secreting adrenaline. So with adrenaline secretion, the body gets ready for fight or flight. So either we will fight the onslaught on us, or we will flee it. But we can also become totally numb and just lying in there. So the body is intricately developed so as to help us to deal effectively with this response.
So Annette, we've seen that anxiety has escalated quite significantly in society today. What is the reason for this?
Marguerite, we live in an unstable world that holds many threats for our survival. Within the workplace, people are threatened, they are bullied, and they are forever having to escalate their production or what they do. So there's forever an exponential increase in pressure on what needs to be delivered in the workplace. But then also, this leads to an effect on personal lives, because there's very little sympathy for the individual and what is required of him to be successful in the workspace. Then also the safety of religion has been let go by many people. And I have found that many people with generalized anxiety disorder tend not to have a safety net. So because the world has become so overcrowded, there's a great pressure on us to perform and to be better than the person next to us, so that we are the person who would get a job or not. Now, if I come back to the whole thing of people seeing things, for example, you might be sitting at your desk and you get an email telling you that you are one of the people up for retrenchment. So, of course, that leads to anxiety, because how on earth are you going to support your family? Where are you going to get the resources? And that leads to anxiety and pressures. Or it might be that you hear that a relationship that you hold dear is not going to survive. And what is the implication of that for you? So there are many hazardous things that happen to us, which influences our homeostasis and creates anxiety. Okay?
So, I mean, we live in South Africa in itself is an interesting place to live in, right? So, what are some of the key pressures that's unique to modern society, and then the social media and the constant connectivity and financial status? So, what are the types of triggers that brings about anxiety?
Yeah, well, I think in South Africa, obviously, we are all aware of the great financial pressures. If we just look at the townships, people living with absolutely the least financial support, and they still have to support their families and some way have to survive and be resilient. So luckily in South Africa, the positive thing is that people become very resilient in South Africa, probably most of the most resilient people in the world. Then, of course, the connectivity that you spoke about, where it has a lot of positive effects for us because we can constantly solve problems. But the negative side is that you are never disconnected. And yesterday I had a client who said to me he's going to Mozambique now on holiday, but he knows he's going to be interrupted in his holiday the whole time. So there's no way of just shutting down completely and having peace, mostly in our modern world.
So, who tends to be most vulnerable in developing anxiety and why?
Okay, I think this brings us to the nature-nurture conflict. So nature would say that there's a genetic predisposition. So if a person comes from a family where there are high levels of anxiety or depression, obviously that creates a predisposition for one also to have such an illness. On the other hand, it also contributes to the environment in which the person lives. So if a person lives in a house where there's high levels of anxiety, perhaps alcoholism, children are being slapped, then they are hyper alert the whole time. And this will predispose them then to assume that life is a dangerous place. And when there is trauma involved, or if the caregiver is not sufficient to provide bonding and love and affection and safety for the child, that child will be predisposed. Going back to the nurture, or the nature again, a child who is born with a very sensitive disposition or a temperament will also be much more likely to develop anxiety responses.
Makes sense. So it's not having a sense of feeling safe.
Yes.
Or belonging.
Yes.
Be beholding.
Yeah.
Okay. So how does factors like trauma, perfectionism, and loneliness contribute to anxiety disorders?
All right, so trauma sensitizes the nervous system, and any trauma makes an imprint on the emotional memory system, so that the person moves into a situation where he perceives the world as being dangerous and is forever watching out for things that happen to him with the expectation that this is going to lead to some form of danger for him. Then perfectionism obviously is a type of thinking style. It's a part of the dysfunctional thinking styles where a person believes that he or she must be perfect to be acceptable. So such a person would place a lot of pressure on himself or herself to perform and not just relax and enjoy life. So it really has to do with one's self-esteem and how you feel about yourself. So the perfectionistic person is always performing so that he can be good enough. Then loneliness you spoke about as well. Obviously, having people around you, we are familial people. So if we are living a life of loneliness where there's no support, there's no touching, there's no caring, we cannot soundboard with someone, it has an immense effect on our mental wellness.
Okay, that makes sense. How can people distinguish between normal stress and anxiety? And when do they know to seek professional help?
When we think of anxiety, it is when anxiety or symptoms persist beyond the stressor. So the difference between stress and anxiety is stress is normally a response to a particular situation or person which is causing stress, whereas anxiety is more the fear of something which might occur. So the person is never free of this because he is forever expecting that something bad will be coming his way.
Okay.
What is important for us, however, to know whether you should seek professional help is if your daily functioning is impeded, if you cannot attend school, if you struggle to get to work and do your work, if you feel overwhelmed, if your functioning is not on standard, and if you cannot cope with daily life, that is when you really need to urgently look for assistance. Because if you start missing work or missing school, you might lose your job as it is. So it is better for you to seek assistance because there is lots of help available and you need not live a life where you are under such pressure.
So maybe a question for the family members who have family members that may be struggling with anxiety. What would you say are the early warning signs that they should be looking out for?
Marguerite, yes, I think one of the important things is social withdrawal. If you find that the person doesn't want to go out any longer, doesn't socialize with other people, remain in their room, lock the doors, and just stay behind closed doors. When people start avoiding responsibilities because they don't feel up to it, you will also notice a change in sleep or appetite. So when the person doesn't sleep well, the person is very vulnerable to other stresses and they struggle to manage that as well. Also, if a person is excessively seeking reassurance, you would know that the person is very anxious. Then a person might also present with irritability or emotional outbursts, which might be out of line with a person's normal personality traits. Then one might also find that a person presents with a range of physical complaints for which there is no really undergirding medical condition. So it is a way of helping themselves or putting forward a reason for why they cannot cope with something, as if there is a real medical reason to that. And then, of course, a loss of interest in normal activities.
Okay. So just out of interest, by the time somebody has a panic attack, I assume that this anxiety has been in existence quite some time and it's now manifesting into a panic attack.
So a panic attack normally comes out of the blue. There's not really something warning the person that is going into a panic attack. For example, a person might go into the mall wanting to do shopping or just buy groceries, and suddenly she goes into panic and everything is obliterated for her. So she's not forewarned about it. But what happens in a panic attack, that a person experiences an increase in heart rate, pressure on the chest, inability to breathe properly, and the person normally experiences that they are going to die. what really happens is that there's an increase in cortisol production, which leads to this. And the person is nowhere near dying, but it feels that way to a person.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the most common forms of anxiety disorders?
Okay, there's a whole range of anxiety disorders. I'm going to just name a few. There's separation anxiety that one would associate with a young child, but it can also happen to an adult if the adult finds it very difficult to separate from a supportive family member or spouse. Then there's agoraphobia, when a person struggles to go out into open spaces. There's anxiety disorders due to medical conditions. Generalized anxiety disorder. This is a disorder where the person consistently feels anxious and he's always just looking for something to hang the anxiety onto. Then we have panic attacks that you've referred to. Social anxiety disorder, where people find it very difficult to socialize normally, and they start isolating themselves and they don't go out to meet with other people. And then we have specific phobias, of course, for heights, for snakes, for blood, and things like that.
Okay. So now let's talk a little bit more about the treatment options. What are the proven ways to manage anxiety?
Right, I think it's very important if a person struggles with anxiety, and perhaps the first thing is for you to admit that you have a problem. And perhaps one can speak to a friend, and a very important resource is the GP, because the GP knows about resources where a person can be referred to. The person can obviously help with medication. I think it's important to seek therapeutic assistance if you feel that your anxiety is out of hand, that you struggle to function, that life has become a real burden to you. So there are different modalities. There's a cognitive behavior therapeutic model, which specifically looks at our thinking styles, because how we think about events that happen to us is very important in terms of how we react to it. So I'm going to show you a short trick. Okay? So what I think influences what I feel influences what I do, and what I do influences what I elicit. For example, if a man is now very unhappy with his wife, for example, and he feels hurt about what had happened, then he will think she is a real, whatever words he would like to use. Then he would feel upset and sad about it. What it does then is to give her a cold shoulder. And what it elicits then is even further rejection. So we do have to understand that our thinking processes is probably the most important thing in how we conduct our lives. So cognitive behavior therapy will attend to that to a large extent. Then there are also other therapeutic models such as EMDR, which is emotion-focused desensitization reprocessing. This is a very useful technique because, as I've said previously, that when we experience trauma, it leaves indents on our emotional system, very much like a ball of clay with indents. And it doesn't come out itself. It's not like a balloon where you indent and it comes out. So we can actually rub that out from a person's memory system so that the way that you view life and things that happen to you are not always primed from the perspective of something terrible that is going to happen to you and you needing to catastrophize about things that might be normal things. Then, of course, medication is very important. So that the GP and the psychiatrist is very important. We know that psychiatrists are very high in demand because of all the mental illnesses that we have around today. But the GP is very helpful and they can also contact the psychiatrist for medication. Then there are certain grounding practices such as mindfulness that people can indulge in. And routine and structure is important, and support groups. But I think it is very important that you don't go on too long to try and help yourself. If you feel this is debilitating, it's much better to go to a professional who can help you.
So Annette, I'm interested to find out, do you maybe give us an example of somebody who's experienced anxiety and how they were successfully treated?
All right, yes, of course, there are many examples. I'm now thinking of a person that I treated in the Free State. He lived in a small little town and he was involved in a car accident. So what happened to him is that for 3 years before I saw him, he couldn't leave town. He would actually just be able to drive up to where the accident had happened, and then he would have to turn back to town. So he was absolutely secluded in this town. He had no more life. So we were able then we did admit him to hospital. We treated him with medication, but also with the EMDR and skills development. And he was then, after a few months, able to relocate to Durban, and he's living a successful life. Another example, which also has to do with an accident, is where a youngish girl or young lady was driving, and she was boxed in from two sides by cars, and then she had to be hospitalized. She was severely hurt, and it was a traumatic experience for her in the hospital. So now what happens, she doesn't want to go anywhere. She doesn't want to drive her own car. She needs to fly for her job. Now when she gets into the bus to go to the airplane or being in the plane, she would become extremely claustrophobic, and she just couldn't make it. She would physically have to get off the plane and back. So obviously this impedes a person's ability to do your job and to have your normal social life. So those are only two examples, but there are many examples of where people were relieved and became free of anxiety and can live a normal, fulfilling life. So for you people out there, it is important. Seeking help, it's not necessary for you to live an oyster life.
So just one more question from my side. You've spoken about EMDR. I'm very interested to find out more. What exactly is EMDR? How does it work? From what I understand, it's a physical technique. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Okay, so EMDR works from the premise that we have a working memory in our prefrontal lobes. It's a hypothetical area. If trauma occurs, it sort of fills up this whole space. It's like a person drowning and just the eyes are above the waterline. So there's no more space left for problem solving or to conduct your life, to concentrate, etc. So it fills up this whole space. So if we use EMDR, this particular approach to trauma therapy, it's a physical approach where the person's brain is himself in charge of the process. But what we do is we desensitize a person to the particular incident. So we take a trauma history and we then desensitize the person with a number of techniques, either with very quick eye movements, which the person has to follow, until the person's emotional bodily response comes down to like a 1 or a 0. So it really aims at decreasing the emotional response in the body, because the emotional response in the body that occurs in response to what happens sends up the message to the brain that you are being threatened, and then the whole range of neurological responses happen in the brain.
So is that then what they call a post-traumatic stress disorder reaction to a past event that then reoccurs? Or how does anxiety link to post-traumatic stress, or are they two different things?
Well, post-traumatic stress disorder falls in a different category, but obviously there's a lot of anxiety involved. And yes, we can use the EMDR very successfully for post-traumatic stress disorder as well. But the important thing is that we want to clear the working memory of the person so that the person can conduct their lives in a functional manner and in a happy manner, and not always be pressured by all these symptoms that come to them.
So it's like a reboot.
Yes. Marguerite, it's very important for people to be able to solve problems. So when you are not a good problem solver and you retain everything that goes along with this problem, it affects your anxiety. So there's two major ways in which one can actually solve problems. The first one is a model where you do a situation analysis of the problem. Then you set particular goals with relation to what is bothering you here. You imply particular strategies to get to those goals, and then you do an evaluation. If it didn't work, it's no problem. You just go through it again, right? But it's a very specific model to solve problems.
Okay.
There's also another problem-solving model, which is called an emotion-focused problem-solving. This is where people don't actually address the problem, but what they do is they want to numb the symptoms or the anxiety that goes along with the problem. So then they go out either avoiding or drinking or using marijuana or any other form of drugs to decrease the response that they have. So they're not at all addressing the problem, they are just addressing the emotion that arises in relation to this problem. And of course that keeps people in this roller coaster of never being able to get out of this.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I may, I would like to add that there are many people out there who really want to be involved with you, who really want to assist you, who have a passion to assist and help people. So, and who will not be judgmental about that. Because this is a complex situation. It's not something that one can easily just resolve yourself or with a friend's help.
Maybe just one last question, and you can decide whether we add it or not in the section. It might be a trick question. So the question really is for people who don't necessarily have the means to go to a psychologist or even pay for a GP consultation. Are there places, support groups, something that they can access that can support them?
Certainly there are online assistants, and we will provide the information about that.
Yes, yes.
And then a person can also go to your provincial hospital where there is normally facilities. If one goes to emergency, they could then refer you either to the psychiatric unit or to the psychologist. So there's always help available. And also psychologists in private practice, many of them do assist people free of charge because they want to assist people.
So just another question, Annette. What are the symptoms of anxiety and stress?
Thank you, Marguerite. That's a very important question. So the first thing I would like to say is if there is a stress, say for example a financial stressor, or it's a snake that wants to attack you, it is not that object as such which leads to a stress response, but it is our interpretation of the danger that that thing holds for us. So first, we have to interpret it before we will actually experience a stress response. But stress then plays out on 4 different levels. We have a physiological response to stress, an emotional response, a cognitive response, and a behavioral response. So if we look at those, just a few physiological responses could, for example, be an increase in heart rate. It could be a feeling of pressure in your throat as if you cannot swallow, or pressure on your chest, or unpleasant feeling in your abdomen. And there's a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms as well. Then emotional level, there's a whole range of emotions such as panic, such as feelings that things are getting out of hand, frustration, aggression, apathy, feeling trapped, feeling hopeless. So there's a whole range of these feelings that develop in response to a stressor. Then we also have cognitive responses. So there's, in the educational literature, there's a word downshifting, which means that we move to our lower survival part of the brain and we cannot think properly. So what happens now is that we become indecisive because we cannot compare things properly. Our concentration becomes under pressure, forgetfulness, confusion, racing, inconsistent thoughts, so that you can't sleep, the feeling that everything is going wrong. Then we might move into bad judgment, spending money when we don't have it, drinking when we really shouldn't be doing that, etc. And then also obsessive thoughts. And then we also have behavioral responses such as emotional outbursts, kicking a door or slamming. One day we were standing out there and a friend of ours who is a medical doctor who drives a Porsche came out and he kicked at the side of that poor Porsche. So that is a typical emotional outburst. Then also overeating, excessive smoking, alcohol use, impulsive behavior, sleeping problems, compulsive behavior, repetitively doing things. Then one can either have a heightened or lowered activity level, fidgeting, throwing things, etc. So there's a whole range of these symptoms that can become very debilitating for one.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned at some point in our conversation earlier today, you said that we actually need stress to get out of bed.
Yes, absolutely. So there is a direct relationship between our ability to function and our stress level. If there's no stress at all, we will just be lying in bed the whole day with a wet blanket over our heads. So we need stress. Stress is good for us. It gets us to do something, to get up, get ready, go to work, start working. So all of this is good stress, positive stress. And this is true up to what we call the optimal stress level, which means this is where we will achieve our highest level of functioning. We know what to do, we can do it, we're in control. But the moment that our stress moves beyond that, now our functioning starts to decrease. Now, just after that, we have a period where we feel uncomfortable because this is where the stress symptoms come to the fore. And very much like an orange robo, which blocks you, can't drive any further. It's not pleasant, but it's not your enemy. It is warning you that something is happening now. So our stress responses, although it is not pleasant to have a headache or any of those responses, it is actually a warning sign for us. So we need to learn to make our stress responses our friends, because they are actually coming to warn us that danger is imminent. So we want to use stress techniques so that we can get back to normal functioning rather than moving into a period of red stress where our abilities are overextended and it takes us months to come back. So it's much better to be on it and manage it as soon as possible.
Okay. And then one last question. Burnout, is that strongly related to the red zone in anxiety?
Yes. Yeah, so burnout is really work depression. Okay. So it's when we've been under pressure for a long time and we struggle to get up in the morning, we struggle with thinking processes, we struggle to problem solve. All of that is the result of burnout, and then we really need to get out of the system and rest. So people many times are very anxious when they are feeling depressed or when they are feeling burnt out. They don't want the work or the employee to know about it, because I think then their job is going to be they will be replaced with someone else. Whereas if you go, say, for example, for a two-week admission, and you are better quickly, then your ability or your chances of retaining your job increases exponentially. So it's much better looking at the problem and managing it rather than trying to just ignore it, and things get worse and worse.
Oh, thank you so much. So if you are watching this and you are struggling with anxiety and depression, or maybe even suicidal thoughts, we just want to carry the message across that you are not alone. There is help available. Please seek out, reach out, and find the resources that is available to you. And if you are struggling yourself or you have a family member, try and recognize the symptoms and take it from here and seek help.